This might be the most reused scene in animation. There's a 2-minute video out there of short clips from different media pieces, all referencing this one scene from the 1988 Japanese animation. Akira. The full sequence starts with Kaneda and his gang of young bikers maniacally swerving through the streets of Neo-Tokyo, locked in combat with a rival gang. Having dismounted the rival leader, the sequence peaks with Kaneda screeching his bike around to finish the job. If you blinked in the instant, you'd have missed it, but this fleeting moment of badassery has managed to embed itself within the minds of a generation of writers, directors, and animators. While Kaneda's drift is undeniably cool, I'm not going to spend the whole video trying to break down 2 seconds worth of animation. If that's all there was to Akira, people wouldn't be praising this film almost 40 years after its release as one of the most influential Japanese animations ever. Which brings me to the point of our conversation. What exactly is it that makes Akira so iconic? The year is 1980, and Japan is undergoing what many consider to be a full-blown economic miracle. Barely 3 decades after the end of World War II, and you'd never be able to tell that this island nation was once on the receiving end of the greatest militaristic dicking in the history of humanity. Rather, Nippon has already re-established itself as one of the largest economic powers of the world, second only in GDP to the United States. Historically low interest rates meant that every man and his dog was out taking loans to capitalize on cheap credit and getting in on that good life. Domestic demand for lifestyle goods and services drove Japanese businesses to expand and innovate, which in turn further spurred the economy in what seemed to be an infinite cycle of blissful consumerism. This period saw the emergence of household brands such as Sony, Toyota, and Nintendo, as well as the blending of traditional Japanese values with that of wild, progressive influences from the West, giving rise to phenomena that pushed the boundaries of Japanese culture. American funk, disco, and R&B were amalgamated into the now iconic genre of city pop. Japanese fashion, previously conservative and homogeneous, grew to reflect the open and carefree excess of the 80s. And nightlife, sometimes glamorous, sometimes discreet, bloomed in places like Shibuya, Ginza, and Kabukicho. Japan, having put its head down for 30 years in order to claw its way out of the rubble, had begun to rediscover its identity as a nation. Anime during the 1980s was not untouched by the broader socio-economic forces sweeping through Japan. The bullish economy meant that studios were greenlighting works that a few years prior would have gone straight to the trash can. Directors began to experiment heavily with subject matter, moving away from the digestible to the darker, more abstract, and sometimes even taboo. This experimentation, paired with unprecedented levels of funding, resulted in a whole array of weird and wonderful productions, some of which have gone down as landmarks within Japanese animation, and others which have since faded into obscurity. At the time, although a lot of these projects were making waves domestically, almost none of them shone under global spotlights. In the West, cartoons were still by and large considered a medium for children, and consequently, anime typically didn't grace the big screens. Even Miyazaki, who was dropping bangers like Nausicaa, Totoro, and Kiki's Delivery Service, all within the span of 6 years, didn't receive much more than lukewarm reception when his works first aired internationally. Akira fell into a similar boat, placing 6th in Japan's box office rankings for 1988, and only airing in selected theatres across America and the UK. So by no means was Akira's debut comparable to the Spirited Aways and Your Names of later years. What was unique about Akira's release though, was that it left a lasting impression on those Western audiences that did go out of their way to see it. So much so that a cult following formed, which helped to socialize Akira to newer audiences, even years after its debut. Perhaps no one could have guessed this back then, but as time went on, this cult following grew to become a global phenomenon. I'll be the first to admit that I didn't fully get Akira. What was the origin of everyone's powers? Where did Akira take the others in the end? And why did they do Kaori so dirty? These are all questions I have even after watching the film several times. Perhaps I have these questions because the movie came out before the manga concluded. Or maybe Katsuhiro Otomo, the mangaka and film director, intended for certain aspects to be ambiguous. It doesn't matter though, because what resonated with me, and I assume the millions of others who stumbled upon it decades after its release, was the raw emotion that Akira conveyed. Having been produced at the peak of Japan's economic resurgence, no expense was spared to ensure Katsuhiro's vision of a dystopic Neo-Tokyo was realized. Dark yet varied colors captured the soul of a city slowly cannibalizing itself. Hyperviolent imagery, animated in meticulous detail, reflected the pent-up rage and frustration of the characters. In particular, Tetsuo, whose gradual descent into self-destruction culminated in one of the most grotesque animated sequences to have ever passed through my eyeballs. And somewhere within this chaos, we, the viewers, saw a part of ourselves. I don't know whether Katsuhiro intended this or not, but the world of Akira presented a grim but very possible future for humanity. The audience felt this in 1989, and I think this feeling has only grown since then. The feeling that the world we live in and the lives we've made for ourselves, whether by choice or some unfortunate series of coincidences, has veered down a path too bleak and too corrupted to ever be set right, and that the only thing left we can do, the only thing left to do, is no single element makes Akira the icon of Japanese filmmaking that it is. The aesthetic, animation, soundtrack, and thematic messaging all culminate in a product that, as the years have passed, has increasingly resonated with audiences both Japanese and Western. Which is probably why the film's rise to prominence has been a slow burn over 4 decades, and not an instantaneous hit upon release. Different aspects of the film have been replicated across animation over the years, and some of these newer productions have become icons in their own right. But to me at least, nothing has yet to showcase the beautiful, controlled madness that Japanese animation is capable of, better than the spectacle that is Akira.